Welcome to the Low Production, High Value Show with your host, Andrew Jenkins. On the show, we'll be exploring the world of entrepreneurship, social media, and the growing digital landscape. Whether you're a seasoned entrepreneur or just starting out, you know that the world of business is constantly evolving and changing. And in today's digital age, it is more important than ever to understand how social media and technology are affecting the way we do business. That's why on this show, we'll be talking to entrepreneurs and experts who have a wealth of knowledge and experience to share with you. From the latest trends and technologies to the struggles and triumphs of running a business, we'll be covering it all. So if you're looking to level up your entrepreneurial game and become more digitally savvy, then let's get started with the Low Production, High Value Show.
Welcome to the Low Production, High Value Show. I'm Andrew Jenkins, and today we're talking to Duarte Garrido from Standard Charter. Welcome.
Thanks, Andrew. Happy to be here.
Great. Well, let's jump right into it. One of the reasons I wanted to talk to you was about, as a social media practitioner, you're dealing with differing agendas, different groups within a larger enterprise for the purposes of rolling out a social media strategy. Not just rolling it out, but I'll call it maintaining social media momentum. And I really would love to get your perspective on how you, one, win stakeholders over, and two, maintain those relationships over time in order to deliver on your mandate.
I guess that's the $1 million question right there, right? I guess winning them over is never a done job. In my experience, is something that you just have to keep working on for as long as your career demands it. You continuously have to get stakeholder approval and buy-in for everything that you try to do on social media, and that's because it's a tremendously public and exposed platform, right? So everything you do has the potential to reach millions of people. So depending on what industry you work in, they'll be more or less risk averse. I come from a background of big tobacco, big sugar, big money. So I have a certain degree of experience in companies that are heavily regulated, risk averse, cautious when it comes to external comms and marketing, uh, often for very good reasons. But as a social media professional, your job is to maintain a balance of challenging that while protecting the reputation and managing risk, because that is your job too. And I think many social media professionals tend to forget about that, especially the younger ones who want to work for edgier brands who perhaps have less to lose and whose public persona is fun and carefree. And that's certainly a way to do social media, and it's a fun way to do social media, but it's not the same way to do social media as when you work for uh, financial services, oil and gas. There's an extra layer of, I guess, trust and reputation that you are a caretaker of, and you have to take on that responsibility, both you as the head of social, and you have to coach your team to do the same, because frankly you'll have a team that's full of um, probably young people, uh, community managers, social media producers, and they are perhaps not as experienced in big multinational companies. They're not as experienced in matters of compliance and regulation, but they are the custodians of your brand. So you have to teach them how to do that.
Well, is it sort of leveraging them for their fresh perspective? Um, in many ways, they know social from being social because their generation or their age group has been more prolific than perhaps other generations. That fresh perspective is helpful, but then you have to marry that with what you talked about with others who have more experience dealing with risk management and compliance.
That's correct. That's exactly what I think my role is. as the head of social of any company is precisely to maintain that balance between what we call the grown-ups and what should be a healthy, motivated, creative social media team. So yeah, I'm here to bridge that gap, to bridge that age gap and that experience gap. And it's a big responsibility, but it's also a lot of fun because you get to push boundaries within certain restraints. And I always say that creativity flourishes more within restraints. I think that if you're allowed to do everything, you're bound to accomplish very little. If they put certain fences around you, you will find creative ways of hopping over them. And 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 that's always it was certainly my experience when working for Philip Morris International. And it is how can we? And at that time, I came into Philip Morris International because, as you know, tobacco companies weren't ever allowed to. Well, not for the recent future, they weren't allowed to advertise or communicate externally anything. But Philip Morris reached out to me when they were actually decided to get away from cigarettes and pivot to a science and technology company. And that was probably the biggest change ever since the company had started. And they needed to communicate externally to the world the fact that they were going to get off cigarettes. They were going to pivot away to a science and technology company. They had these better alternatives to continued smoking and all of this. And the challenge was we had to say all of this without ever mentioning product, service, or anything related to that. So it was really challenging. As a comms professional, it was really fun because we had to find extremely creative ways of communicating without uh, without putting the foot in the wrong place. Um, so yeah, and obviously navigating a huge network of lawyers and compliance managers and all of that, and senior stakeholders who'd been in the company for a long time and were quite frankly averse to risk, averse to communicating externally, scared of saying the wrong thing on social media. So yeah, it was a kind of a crash course in stakeholder management, I guess. The result was that the legal team and the social media team had this fantastic relationship, literally a day-to-day relationship where we had lawyers embedded within our team that ensured that we everything we were doing was kosher, and we were not crossing any boundaries that weren't supposed to be crossed, and that we were it kept us on the straight and narrow, and that was a good thing because it made us aligned with the company's purpose and mission. Um, and aligned with the regulator's code of conduct.
Did that happen by design or organically, or a bit of both?
I
That
guess
working relationship.
I guess organically, honestly, it was organically. From that point onwards, it always happened to me by design because I learned a lot after my experience at Philip Morris that I've been applying to every company that I've been since. So Coca-Cola, HBC, and now Standard Chartered. But at that point in time, it was organically. It was a sort of okay, we were building this content calendar. We need to ensure that everything that we're saying is within legal limits, and because we can have the best sort of goodwill in the world and good intentions, but you know how these batches of red tape work. If you say the wrong word in the wrong sentence, you're done. So it's not just about ensuring that you have a team that's got the right culture and the right mindset and that wants to make a positive change in the world, starting with their own company. It's about more than that. It's about being extra careful, understanding your legal constraints, understanding your compliance restraints, and playing with the tools that you're given. So the solution that I found was okay. So we need um, legal to go through every single post that we put out, and obviously, that is very hard when you don't have embedded lawyers within your team, right? Because you just won't have the workflows, the processes in place to make that agile. So organically, I became closer and closer to the legal team, and eventually got one of them embedded in our team who was just sort of skimming over everything. And it was great because it wasn't because then legal started to understand what we were doing too. So we gained buy-in by embedding someone that's external from social media into our team. And I think that's a really valuable lesson actually to every social media team is if you want to get buy-in from stakeholders, pull them in, open the door, allow them in, and just make them understand why you're doing what you're doing and what the value is of social media. Because especially now, as we're entering, time of crisis, which is the big C word that economically we're seeing everywhere, and it is a crisis, at least certainly in the Western world. Um, we are forced, or we will be forced, to prove the value that we add to a company. And historically, marketing has been very bad at that. We're a function that's very good at spending money, but not great at showing return on it. And I'm afraid when times get tough, that needs to change. So one of the things that I'm really embedding now on the team is this need to ensure that we show value, that we show return on investment, that we tie whatever it is that we're trying to do somehow, directly or indirectly, to the company's bottom line. I think that you need to do that, whatever team, whatever company, whatever industry you're in right now. That is something that you have to have at the center of your social media or digital marketing strategy overall.
Well, I want to come back to ROI, but before we do it, I don't want to leave legal and stakeholder management there. When you have someone embedded, the way I position it is that legal or compliance. I mean, you all work for the same company, so it's not that they want to say no. Their mandate is to address risk. So by making the relationship collaborative as early as possible, the embedding will hopefully work towards your success. But one of the things I want to highlight or get your take on is by having that person embedded, um, in a sense, it made you not only more productive on what you were putting out, but I hope more agile in how you responded to anything that materialized as a result of your efforts. Because I want to stitch that together with, as you were helping them shift the messaging to more of a science and technology company, how did the public respond? Was there still backlash? And again, I don't want to breach any confidentiality here. The whole repetition management and aspect, and again, tying back to having someone embedded, I suspect you were able to be more responsive in an agile way.
Definitely. And I mean, it's not breaching any confidentiality telling you what is very public, which is that Philip Morris at the time had a big reputation problem for obvious reasons. And they aren't alone either. It's not the sole company or the sole industry that's got reputational issues, and whose overwhelming sentiment online is neutral to negative, frankly. And I think the role of any social media team, of any digital marketing team right now, because marketing has pivoted away from being the function to sort of sell an advertised product or service to being essentially your way to communicate to everyone in the outside world, right? That reaches clients and prospective clients, but also external stakeholders like government officials, tier one media, regulators, NGOs, business partners, key investors, colleagues, future colleagues. So everyone is part of your sort of external network of stakeholders is somehow, I guess, linked to social media or on social media in different ways. So this to say that there is obviously a certain degree of care that you as a social media function have to have in changing public perception of your company. And that's the sort of trust and reputation building angle to what should be in the forefront of every digital marketer's mind right now. It's not just about selling product or service. It's about selling reputation and trust, right? And I'm say selling, but I don't really like that word because it's really about gaining, or showing or building, right? Because you can talk the talk as much as you want, but it's very important that you come in as any comms professional. You come into a company where you know that whatever it is that you're saying externally is being fulfilled internally, right? And that there is alignment. Because if there isn't alignment, you'll be called off and your efforts will fail, and it's a waste of your time and a waste of your career, right? So it's important that you align with the company's values before you come in, particularly as an external comms professional, I think, above all else.
The way I describe it often is, even if you don't have any a social media presence as an organization, at a minimum you should listen, because you will find that you're being talked about in social, and therefore you're in social whether you want to be or not, because you're part of the conversation, or at least being discussed. Which leads me, and touching on, you were talking about, as a comms professional, do you, and I'm not here to start a war between comms and marketing, but kind of taking that thread of what you just described, this idea that maybe marketing is rolled up into the overall comms, or maybe comms is the wrong word, this dissemination of the company values, and that, from a standpoint of uh, coming across as not just in sales mode, that maybe the comms approach has to be overarching or all encompassing.
So I think that we are witnessing, we have been witnessing for some time now, the most profound change in the marketing function that it's ever witnessed. And I think that justifies why CMOs are now raising to the level of CEOs in some companies, why CMOs are suddenly called chief growth officers and not just marketing. Why, yeah, why social media heads are climbing to the roles of CEOs as well, and that's justifiable because marketing, like I said, is no longer just about pushing product or service, right? It is about talent retention and attraction. So it assists HR, and people in culture and employer branding. That's all marketing. That should sit all under the CMO. And actually, social media plays an integral part in all of that. So if marketing now is the engine of growth for a company because it does press relations, public relations, government relations, selling product and service, so still getting MQL, still getting leads, attracting talent, retaining talent, creating culture. So suddenly, what isn't marketing? You know what I mean? So, but if marketing is that engine of growth, then certainly social media, it's its fuel, right? It sits right at the core of that, and that is because, like I said, all of your audiences are on social. So you have a tremendous opportunity to do social right. So you have to speak to everyone. Obviously, the challenge of speaking to everyone is that, well, you're speaking to everyone, right? So what are you going to say? But it's a challenge and an opportunity, I guess.
Does that suggest then that, or lend credence to the argument that social needs a seat at the table? By that I mean, when you go around, and you talk, here's marketing, communication, whoever leads product or service delivery, whoever employee branding, etc., that social having a seat at the table can ideally illustrate where and how it can provide value to each of those groups. But if it doesn't have a seat at the table, then it's only thought of as an afterthought.
Absolutely. And it's blindsided, right? Because it's really important, and that's something that it's probably my first sort of, well, not my first. My first challenge is always to build a team, build a culture, build a team by capabilities, but also sort of get them excited and happy and fulfilled. But my second challenge is, okay, how do I get our voices heard? How do I get a seat at the table for social and right at the top table as well? How do I shrink the channel of communication between myself and the C-suite? And not because I have the ambition to climb over anyone and reach the C-suite, but because I think it's really important for senior executives in the company to have their finger on the pulse when it comes to social media, to understand the value of it, but also the risk of it, the implications of it. Um, and 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 that's something that I really take on myself as a head of social. And if you'll see, my role now has a funny little add to it. So it's not just global head of social media; it's global head of social media and cross-channel activation. And that's a slightly convoluted way of saying that social is not just social. Social is cross-channel. So social is really omni-channel. So it should be the glue that brings everything together when it comes to digital channels, right? And that includes paid, owned, and earned media. Because honestly, again, social touches on all of that. People still think of earned media as that op-ed in the New York Times, but actually, earned media is social media mentions on Twitter by the New York Times. So there is that kind of, you have everything there at your disposal. You have a huge platform for paid media, probably the best platform for paid media, no matter what Google tries to shove down your throat, and and by far your biggest organic opportunity for reach. And now, actually, we have an extra layer of, oh, things are getting really interesting, which is the social graph as we knew it, right? Which is you as a user were being fed content based on the people that you knew. So if someone in your first or second degree network would like, share, comment, then you would see it in your feed. With the advent of TikTok, there came an algorithm which gave you content based on your interests, learned about your likes and dislikes, and made a really addictive tool for you to spend your time in. And
And it surprises you that you find yourself interested in stuff you never would have thought of.
this is very true. You learn about yourself. Um, and the fact of the matter is, it was so successful, so addictive, that all of the platforms started following suit. So Meta was next. Now Instagram, Facebook also pivoted away from the social graph to the social interest graph. And now I know firsthand that LinkedIn is following as well, and TikTok and Twitter. So they are all pivoting away to be able to give the user content outside of your network based on your interests. And this proves a tremendous opportunity for any company, right? Because if this sort of rumor of social media organic is dead, everything is pay to play now. It's a pay to play world, and we're all just living in it. And if you want to get your content seen by people, you best put some dollars behind it, and those dollars are going to become ever more expensive on platforms like Facebook, and for less and less return on your investment. And that was certainly the case until now. Now, if you study your key target audiences, if you get to know them, and this is where social listening comes in, right? If you get to know them, if you get to understand them, their likes and dislikes, their interests, their types of content that they engage with, the keywords and hashtags that they use and follow, right? Then suddenly you have a great opportunity to shape your content, your corporate content, to those key target audiences' interests. And this is, by the way, the dullest, most whitewashed, corporate jargon filled white paper that you can possibly think of, that your company is planning to put down externally. Then suddenly you can grab that white paper and go like, okay, now let me see what my key target audiences are interested in, and how I can give them this white paper in a way that's interesting and palatable to them, at the right point of their audience journey. So it all goes down to understanding your audience first, and then creating a content strategy based on that.
And now, a word from our sponsor. Social media has become an imperative for almost every business. Discover how to successfully implement an effective social media strategy that is supported and integrated throughout every part of your organization with this essential book from our host, Andrew Jenkins. Social Media Marketing for Business, Scaling an Integrated Social Media Strategy Across Your Organization, is now available from Amazon or KoganPage.com.
Do you see that as a challenge for organizations. I describe it as a bit of a war for attention, in that if we're shifting from social graph to, I'll call it interest graph, this idea that if I'm not producing enough content to be in the interest stream for visibility, because the social graph that I was reliant upon, if they're not following me, there's two things happening. There's the opportunity for me to be discovered, or I should say, or my organization to be discovered, which is great, based on interest and hashtags and content themes. But there's also the risk of not being visible at all because I'm not producing content with enough in enough volume to give me sufficient opportunity to be discovered.
Definitely, it is a war for attention. It is a numbers game still. We can wave the flag of quality over quantity as much as we like, and it's certainly important. But in social media, consistency was always key. If you're sharing things sporadically, no matter how good that content is, the algorithm will push it down. And that's just the reality of the algorithm that we live in, right? And we have to understand it as much as possible and adapt as it adapts because it does adapt frequently. So we just have to keep, and that's the real challenge. And that's the real sort of, I guess, unrecognized challenge of any social media operation is keeping up with the times. Because external, I don't think actually the C-suite realizes how much we have to adapt all the time. And it's always the classic matrix structure of a company always goes like web, internal comms, um, social media. Well, social media isn't a channel. Social media is 10 channels. Right? So, and there's this myth going that it's always like, oh, but why do you have so many people on your social media team and so little people on your web team? That's well because you have one website and 10 different social media channels. So we should have 10 teams. So so this is, it's really challenging because not only platforms keep changing its algorithm, but platforms come and go, new ones come in, features change. I mean, the adaptability and the agility that you have on your social media operation is absolutely essential for you to be able to deliver results.
Well, and not you, I tell organizations you don't have to be on 10, but you can't survive on being on one. You need to look at all of the 10 or 12 or 15, depending on the day, see if your audience is there, and figure out for yourself whether you can, is this a channel I can commit to and as you describe, sustain with sufficient consistency. There's numerous social channel ghost towns that we've all seen, but at a minimum, brands from a brand protection should set up a social account and leave it dormant, maybe with messaging saying this is not an active account. There's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't detract from the brand. But Walmart didn't do this on Parlor, or sorry, True Social, and someone went in and set up a Walmart parody account on True Social with their brand, and they're to a degree held hostage. So I wanted to jump back to ROI and marketing, and and kind of tie that with to the channel discussion about making a business case, not just for social, but what channels you should be on. Um, Talk to me a little bit about, in a sense, when you've had to defend or persuade people about your approach to social and what you're trying to achieve from a social strategy.
Always tie it back to the business is how I frame it. If you want to really sell what you're doing internally, you need to first understand the company that you're working for. So understand the company, understand the business goals of the company for that specific year, and play to them. it always starts with, if you think of the OKR structure, objectives, key results kind of thing, you look at the company's wider goals for the year. Then you look at the whole department, which can be a mixture of comms or marketing or whatever it is that your organization has structured social media in. But you have to look at your department's goals for the year. And then you have to outline your objectives and key results to feed directly into those goals. So you have to create a value structure that allows you to prove by the end of the year or by the end of Q1 or H1 that you're directly or indirectly adding value to the company. And once you do that, and I say directly or indirectly because you can be part of a social media operation that sells product or service on social. That's a direct link to the bottom line, right? Or you can be part of social media operation that increases levels of trust within key stakeholders. So that's indirect value. But if your trust levels rise, and that's why KPIs have to be then decided based on those OKRs, based on those department goals, based on those company goals. So KPIs go right at the bottom of that. KPIs need to be, if your role is to influence external stakeholders, if your role is to increase the brand equity of your company, the levels of trust is to protect the reputation of your company, then your KPI should be related to trust. It should be relating to brand equity, to net sentiment score, etc. And that's essentially how you sell your operation and the value of your operation to key stakeholders. You have to speak their language, and it is very common for, I guess, traditionally for marketing professionals to speak very different languages than finance professionals, right? The CMO and the CFO have a historically difficult relationship because the CFO talks income and revenue, and the CMO talks spend.
Right. Well, and also quantitatively very often versus qualitatively. Well, the when you talk about understanding the organization and do you look at you know when you talk about sort of a team or a department or a business unit's objectives and measurement and striving not to have social operating in isolation or a silo, that it's meant to be a complement. Do you ever come across situations where sometimes when people say like, what's the ROI of social or how do you measure social media? So let's put social media aside for the moment. Talk to me about what you do and how you measure its success now. And that sort of puts the onus back on whoever it is you're talking to, whoever it is you're trying to persuade. And it goes back to this idea of understanding, and then you can figure out where and how social will complement it. But sometimes it illuminates a some gaps in their. It's not meant to shame anyone, but it's just some gaps in measurement. I'm just curious about what, if any, experience you've had in that realm.
Well, I guess, yeah, I've always started by going around the company speaking to internal stakeholders in any new job that I come into and asking them about their own pain points, their own business objectives, their own audiences, their organizational structure within that department, what type of content they create and for what reason. And then, only then, do I come in and say, all right, this is how I think social can give you a hand in reaching your business objectives. And suddenly, you're no longer measuring the success of social, you're measuring the success of social on account of how many other internal departments you're helping achieve their own business goals. So it's indirect attribution for success, right?
And you're showing up to be supportive rather than um, a potential sort of diversion of attention.
Yeah, facilitators. That's what every social media professional should see itself as. It is a facilitator. I had one, it was probably the most flattering thing anyone ever wrote about me. But while I was at PMI, um, they had this internal content studio, and they sort of wrote about they wrote stories of different employees at a different point in time or whatever. And they wrote this story about me that was published externally, and and the sort of I guess, what do you call it? Not a nickname. Well, the adjective that they used to describe me was the facilitator, and that for me was it was really really flattering because it's the best thing you can call a social media professional. Yeah, if I always see myself as the person who comes in and makes everyone else's life a little bit easier and helps them achieve their own goals. So, and I think if a social media team has that mindset, it is bound for success. And even when times get tough, people will know that social media is valuable because it's valuable to them. And if you operate in a silo and you're self-serving, then no one knows why the hell you're there for, and it's very easy to get rid of you.
If you can show that you're supportive, that you're a complement, that you're augmenting their efforts, then yeah, then uh, you can justify your existence. I want to jump back to your title about global channel activation. Was that something you pushed for, or does it speak to the organization's maturity that they recognize the connection between the two?
It does. It was a marriage made in heaven, quite frankly, because I was giving loads of keynotes about this need to put social media at the center of everything, turn it into a facilitator team, a cross-functional team that serves everyone in the business, from HR to procurement to sales to everything. And then I got approached to come into a role which his title was Global Head of Social and Cross-Channel Activation. So, and when I asked about it, they said that precisely they saw it as not just social, but everything digital. So that included paid media, so display, PPC, all of the things that they consider to be part of any social media team's remit. So they saw social media at the center as sort of like almost an octopus, and it does speak to the maturity of that department tremendously, and to the person that's right now sitting at the helm of it, who has a really solid vision of what that department should deliver.
Oh, it's great to see some organizations, to that level of maturity that have adapted and now accepted and now really advocate for that sort of scenario. Curious in the different roles that you've had. If you take it as a victory, is there any an example without naming names, but a particular group who was the most resistant that you won over, and perhaps how did you win them over with respect to making them a believer in social?
That's a good question. Um, Let me take a minute and think about it. I think actually, definitely legal was one of them. In a couple of companies that I worked for, but frankly, I think the biggest challenge is always with the C-suite, and that is
Is that
because
from unfamiliarity or
yeah, I think
risk
it.
aversion or
I think it comes down to a certain level of ignorance of the platforms themselves as well, because C-suite um, professionals are usually, well, they're usually older, first of all, not wanting to be ageist here, but they are usually older, and social media is only 20 years old. So there's that sort of kind of challenge. The first challenge is that. I guess the second challenge is that they're unbelievably busy. And they just don't have time to spend on social media, which again is understandable, right? And then the third challenge is they have a lot they they're very susceptible to any sort of reputational risk. Their neck is on the line very easily if anything goes wrong, and because of that level of exposure, they see social media as, first of all, a threat, and only then an opportunity. So they are, I think, from my experience, is that they are the most difficult group to win over. Um, but it's important that you do. It's important that you have either a direct line to the C-suite or at least a senior advocate within your department that has a direct line to the C-suite and that believes in you and your project and what you're doing and delivering, and that can vouch for you. If you don't have that, it's going to be very hard to get anything off the ground.
Hmm. Well, even though it might have been, to your point, some degree of ignorance, or just being really busy, or a combination of the two, in your experience, is it a matter of that it wasn't necessarily that they were unwilling to learn, or like they were open to being persuaded? Is that a fair assessment?
I guess it's not about being open or closed. I think it's more about having the bandwidth and the time to actually give you the time to make your case, right? It's most of them just don't. I mean, it's very hard to get time with a CEO, right? It's and it's certainly hard to get time with a CEO to sell on your social media strategy. It just doesn't happen. So either you can definitely have it with your CMO. So you just have to ensure that your CMO has a good relationship with your CEO, and that's your way in, right? But the reality of things is you just won't have that face-to-face time with your CEO unless you're a tiny, agile startup. Then I'm sure you can, and your CEO is a young, personal branding expert, and in which case, kind of, a rock star CEO. In which case, yeah, you probably can get that face-to-face time with him, but certainly not for multinational companies.
Well, I mean, to your point, many CEOs, their careers started long before social. And so this is just yet another thing that they have to contend with, and hopefully but still recognize the importance. Well, just before we wrap things up, as from one, I just wonder if you have any advice. If there was one thing you wanted to convey to a fellow social media practitioner, what would it be to ensure their success or navigating this ever changing environment?
I think it's what I mentioned earlier on. It's the facilitating. Put on that cape, the facilitator cape. Be that person. Be the person who comes in and says, "Tell me what your problem is, and let me try and help you." So kind of, help me help you. Have that predisposition, and you will see that people's guards go down very easily. Very important doors get unlocked and open for you because everyone wants help, especially in big companies. Help is always needed. And particularly when times get tough and headcount shrinks, then help from other departments is always welcome. And if you come into any big matrix organization, you will see that there is always a bit of friction between departments, and there is usually historically a bit of friction between comms and marketing, like proper performance marketing, so the business, right? And always. And if you can come in and go like, okay, where is the friction? What is our worst relationship? And then you be the person who goes in and mends it. You be the person who goes in and says, I know what my role is. My role is to come here and help you. Wonders will happen to you, I promise.
That's a great place to stop. So thank you very much for your time today, Duarte. Really much appreciated. And on behalf of the audience, thank you very much.
No problem, Andrew. My pleasure. It was really nice to meet you.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Low Production High Value Show. Be sure to give us a rating and subscribe to make sure you never miss an episode. Don't forget to check out Volterra at volterradigital.com to learn more about how they can support your social media marketing.